Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. I would really love to hear from you if your experience is like mine. I noticed something about my own understanding of the world as I found it, and that is simply this, that how you find things is how you tend to think things have always been. For instance, when I was a boy, Muhammad Ali was the heavyweight champion of the world. Now, there was a couple of challengers that were significant challengers. I would name Ken Norton and Joe Frazier and George Foreman as those great challengers. But I didn't know when Sonny Liston was the world champion. And so when, for instance, Muhammad Ali fought Michael Spinks, he ended up losing that fight and his title, and I don't think he ever regained it after that. But my assumption was that he had to win because he was the champion. That's what he was. That's what he did. That's what the world was like. The world that I came into was, again, as I became aware of things like boxing, was the world where he was the champion. So I thought he always would be. I never conceived of the idea that he might grow old. Same thing with Terry Bradshaw, the Steelers quarterback. He was always going to be the Steelers quarterback because he was the Steelers quarterback when I first became aware of him. The idea of retirement didn't make any sense. The same thing, just in terms of in the world of sports, who was good and who wasn't good. You know, it seemed like every year when I was a kid, the Pirates won the NL East, and usually the Reds won the NL West, maybe the Dodgers, and then the A's won the AL West, and the AL East typically went to either the Orioles or the Red Sox, and those were the good teams. And the teams like the Rangers or the Padres or the Astros or the Expos, they were no good, and they never would be any good. In college football, it was USC and UCLA. UCLA, who thinks about UCLA as a football team anymore? Nobody does. But when I was a kid, they were good. And that's who you thought of. It was Oklahoma. It was, even who thinks of USC either? Oregon. Nobody thought about Oregon. So there's just this, sort of like you walk into the room and you think the room has always been just like this and always will be just like this. I'll give you another example. Clothes. Now, the 70's were not a good era for clothes. And I had my share of shameful things that either I wore voluntarily because I didn't know any better or that I had to wear. But one of the things that we wore, I remember, and again, it takes me back to fall, autumn, which is my favorite season, and that season where I have the deepest sense of nostalgia. But I remember having what was called a CPO. Any of you remember CPOs? These were kind of sort of, you know, how people wear shirts like a jacket. This was sort of between a shirt and a jacket, probably a little closer to the jacket side. And it tended to have heavy wool on the outside and some sort of nylon or acrylic or something on the inside. And probably caught in between, I don't know, but these were jackets or shirts that you would wear in the fall, and you called it, where's my CPO, or I got a new CPO, and I don't even know what CPO stood for or stands for, but everybody had one, and again, probably 99% of you, or 90% of you anyway, have never heard of a CPO. You have no idea what I'm talking about. And yet for me, it wasn't a new thing. It wasn't an odd thing. It was just normal. And I just didn't, I assumed that CPOs had always been around and always would be around. I guess you think of the world as being more static than it is. When I was starting school, so say kindergarten, first grade, this would have been 70, 71, and there were a lot of hippies still around. They didn't just stop in 1968. And when we went to and started the study center, we had a lot of hippie-like Jesus people showing up at the study center, and that too was normal. I didn't conceive of something different. I thought that the bands that were a big deal had always been a big deal and always would be a big deal. But the world does change. And things do get forgotten. And part of the reason I love doing this segment is to remember the things that have been forgotten. Things that, again, that I thought were going to be there forever, that weren't there forever. It doesn't have to be a tragedy. It's just a change, and I guess change is normal. But let me know, is that your experience where you just think it's normal for Muhammad Ali to be the champ, and that it's normal for, the U.S. to have a space program, things like that. I'd love to hear you. Please let us know. As always, we can get emails at hello@rcjr.com, hello@rcjr.com, hello@rcjr@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much. Some things we never seem quite able to leave behind on this side of the veil. Try as we might to mature and to grow beyond this peculiar brand of foolishness, I fear that at heart we're still junior high girls. Our problem isn't, I trust, that we talk on the telephone too long, or that we go through life still having a crush on David Cassidy or some Backstreet Boy. No, our problem is we think ourselves masters of motives. You remember either saying or hearing someone say something like this: I was at the mall and Susie was walking the other way, so then I smiled and waved and said, "Hey, Susie," and she wouldn't even look at me. She just walked on by. She is so stuck up. We, I hope, wouldn't say this anymore. But we still practice this kind of foolishness. We may conclude, for instance, that such and such a family never comes to potluck suppers because they think they're better than us. We conclude that this other family bought a new car because the husband works too hard or charges too much for the work he does. We think the pastor preached the sermon he preached because he has assumed the worst about us, when he doesn't even really know our situation. The root of this, however, isn't simply immaturity, but pride. Pride has at least two conduits through which it flows. First, we think ourselves far too clever. What we actually know is that Family A doesn't come to potluck suppers. Family B has a new car, and Pastor C preached a sermon. There are equally plausible explanations for each of these events. Perhaps Family A has one child with horrible food allergies, another child who will fall into a tailspin if he doesn't get a nap, and a third child that doesn't need an excuse to fall into a tailspin. Maybe Family A, rather than thinking they're better than others, is actually ashamed of their family's behavior in this kind of setting. Maybe they don't come because they don't think they measure up. Perhaps family B was given the new car by friends or family. Perhaps it's a company car. Perhaps some other business cheated him, and with the settlement money, they bought a car. Perhaps, and don't let this shock you, perhaps God has prospered family B, and they bought a new car. As for the pastor, maybe he was preaching the next text, and in God's providence, it hid a sin you think others might perceive in you. Now, there's a second way this folly flows from pride. Not only are these sinless explanations plausible, but it is likewise probable that these plausible answers have nothing to do with you. That is, we fall for junior high girl syndrome only when we begin to think the world revolves around us. We're so vain, I bet we think this podcast is about us, don't we? Don't we? Friends, God is not surprised by the existence of junior high girls. He's given us the antidote. And the antidote is love. Love, God tells us, suffers long and is kind. It does not envy, nor does it parade itself. It's not puffed up and does not behave rudely. Now, these are all great things about love, but they are only tangentially related to our concern. But then comes these three. Love does not seek its own, is not provoked, and thinks no evil. This first, that does not seek its own, is rather more sophisticated than not wrestling for the television remote. It means spending less time thinking on how our loved ones have hurt us, and more time thinking through how we might help our loved ones. Is not provoked doesn't mean that we take our emotions and clamp them down to avoid a reaction. We do not, because so far we haven't said anything about the record of wrongs we're keeping, pat ourselves in the back. We instead keep no record at all. We avoid being provoked simply by following the next injunction, thinking no evil. That is, we practice a judgment of charity, which is rather easy to do once we have died to self. It's true enough that we're to be wise as serpents. There are bad guys out there who want our money and will cheat to get it, who want to borrow our reputation and will manipulate to get it. But it may just be that the path to getting beyond junior high girls is to become elementary school girls. What we need is an innocence that simply believes that others love us and want what's best for us. What we need is an innocent trust that God will protect us and take care of us. May He give us the grace to grow younger as we grow closer.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.